Welcome to the Education of a Weaponized Man podcast. Here's this week's question. What if strength and speed are irrelevant?
This podcast exists for one reason: clarity. Clarity about violence, clarity about responsibility, and clarity about what it actually means to be prepared. This is not a show about fighting. It's not about aggression, dominance, or even just tactics. It's about judgment under pressure, restraint when force is justified, and responsibility for consequences of action and inaction. My name is Greg LeBoeuf, and I have spent over 3 decades working with men who face violence professionally and men who face it unexpectedly in ordinary lives. But I'm also a father and a husband, and like many of you, I've watched the world change faster than most people are willing to admit. This podcast isn't here to scare you, but it's also not here to reassure you. It's here to help you think clearly about situations that do not allow time for thinking. If you're looking for shortcuts, hype, or entertainment, this is probably not for you. But if you believe preparation is a responsibility, not an obsession, you're in the right place. Let's begin.
All right, so this episode, context beats attributes. Some people believe that protection is something that a man either has or doesn't have, right? They believe that when the moment arrives, that their instinct to protect, which I agree is innate in men, but they believe that their instinct is actually going to take over, and that instinct, when it emerges, if it emerges, that it is going to be able to handle that situation. It's going to be able to problem solve the context of whatever you happen to be facing. That is a very comforting idea. But real violence does not test your identity. So yes, you have this protector, innate, hardwired identity inside of you. You see yourself that way. You feel it. Okay, that instinct to protect. But violence doesn't test your identity. It tests your judgment inside of the context of the situation that you're facing. That's what's different now than what was different in our ancestors. Okay, and I want to explain this because it's very, very important. You see, obviously there's going to be a stress, there's going to be uncertainty, but there are legal boundaries. There's the pressure of whether you have your family with you. There's the environments that we operate in that are around you. All of this shapes what is actually the right decision, is being shaped by all of these factors, right? And so your instinct or your adrenaline and the stress chemical that activates, that's not going to solve, your instinct doesn't solve these problems. Okay, that it just doesn't work that way. So the idea of this quote unquote born protector is very misleading. And that is why serious men have to develop something beyond their instinct. So I would think of it, or I think of it this way. If we go way back and imagine primitive man, and we have this hardwired innate survival system inside of us, so the sympathetic nervous system, we are, the human species, it is crazy to think that such an evolved, like how we evolved or created, whatever your viewpoint is of this, but human beings are an incredible species. So to think that we have no innate hardwired survival instincts or mechanisms like you look in nature. A chameleon can, change colors to blend in better. They have the ability to camouflage. Why? Well, because it's a survival trait. Like all of these different things. Well, human beings have a very powerful hardwired innate survival instinct. And that's what people are talking about. It's either in a man or it isn't. He either has it or he doesn't. Right? But if you go way back, we lived in a time where the whole purpose, it was survival. That was all you did, was survival. Like, you didn't spend time on social media. You know what I mean? Like ancestors, like what'd you have to do? Everything was about survival. Everything was about finding food, finding shelter. Everything was about learning how to protect or avoid apex predators. Like everything was about survival. So imagine ecosystem where the human species is part of this ecosystem, like every other creature and every other animal that's around them, and it's all just about survival. Every single day was about survival. When you woke up, what was your mission for the day? You had hunger pains, so you needed to hunt or find or gather food. There was the elements, so you had to seek shelter. You had to human beings had to evolve, and it was just survival based, right? Yes, there was still a social construct in that, but they did it again for what? For survival. You wanted, you had a tribe, you had a community of people. Why? So that you could survive. Everything was about survival. So these hardwired innate survival instincts that are inside human beings, there was a point in time when we utilized those every single day. That just was what each day was about. So you imagine if you are just in a constant survival mode where you are trusting instincts and intuition and being guided by them, and then learning and course correcting, because guess how you learn? Well, you fail. You know what I mean? When you don't know, your instincts have never experienced something, and so you don't know to avoid an apex predator. You know what I mean? Then you're killed. Somebody in the tribe was killed, and then you realize, oh, geez, that's dangerous. And so your instincts all survive. What I'm getting at is, look at us nowadays. When you wake up, your first instinct in most parts of the world, this is not true for every part of the world, unfortunately, but you wake up and you're not in survival mode. You just get up and walk 4 or 5 feet into your ensuite bathroom, where you have the luxury of running water, where, your furnace has been on half the night to keep your house warm. You crawled out from underneath your store-bought duvet blankets. When your stomach starts to feel a little grumbly, so you walk downstairs and open your fridge. Like, we're not operating off survival instincts anymore. And we haven't been for a long time. Doesn't mean that we don't have them, but you have to understand that when you don't use something, you lose a connectedness to it. And then the other side that I think is very important is this idea of people today talking about this born protector mindset is so freaking dangerous, because the other thing that you didn't have back in the day, when you were out gathering and some apex predator tried to rip your throat out, and you took out your rock dagger that you had fashioned, and you know what I mean, and plunged it into its neck and killed it. You would, the tribe would come out, you drag it back, skin it, use the meat, that was survival. Well, you didn't have to go to court to justify your actions. If you know what I mean? Like, nowadays, like, we are living in a completely different context. That if you take your vehicle and you you decide to drive in the middle of the painted line on the road, somebody can stop you, and somebody can charge you, and someone could arrest you, and somebody could take you to court and try you and convict you, and do all of these. There's It's a different context, and it's important to have this kind of visual or this analogy or this comparison in your mindset, because we're talking about the facts that context beats attributes. And so it's not enough just to have attributes. You say, I got strength and speed and power and sensitivity and spatial awareness and line familiarization and all these things. And attributes are powerful. Attributes are extremely, extremely important. But they have to be refined within the context and the ability to develop judgment and the ability to discern what is actually happening, and how things like environment and whatever stressors are being brought upon you, and whether your family's present, and imminent risk evaluation, and all of these different things. These are the things that determine what is actually appropriate and justified in a violent situation, not just these attributes. So the first thing that has to happen in this discussion is that you have to, I don't want to say you have to wipe out the idea of a born protector, but you have to severely limit what that brings to the table. Yes, we have hardwired instincts. You are born with an innate survival instinct. That is, you have the sympathetic nervous system and the parasympathetic nervous system. So yes, your body in a time of threat is going to mobilize all of your resources, and it is going to reshape you physiologically. It's going to reshape you psychologically, which then impacts the physical capabilities that we may or may not have. but within a limited scope. And why I say limited is not to downplay the power of our innate survival instincts. I mean, listen, your body under a threat will create what's called vasoconstriction. It'll literally start to remobilize blood flow in your body. It'll stop blood flow to all of your extremities, which is why you lose feeling in your hands and your feet and your lower legs and stuff like that. It shuts down digestion, does all these powerful things. Well, yeah, you don't want to minimize that. If I get stabbed, shot, bit, whatever happens on my limbs, there can literally be no blood coming out. Well, why is that? Because the body was smart enough to pull and shut down all of those perimeter veins and redirect blood flow into our major arteries to get them into our biggest muscle groups and to get them into our organs, right? To give us extra strength and speed and durability and prevent us from bleeding out and all these different things that help us survive. And those are mind-blowing strengths. But two things. One, most people have never fully experienced the sympathetic nervous system activation, which means when all of a sudden you can't feel your hands, you can't feel your legs or your feet, or you can't hear the same way because you experience auditory exclusion, or you get dry mouth, or your digestion shuts down, or you blow the ballast, meaning if there's anything over 200 cc's in your upper lower intestine, you either soil yourself or defecate yourself in certain situations. Well, most people don't understand that this is the body's mobilization. This is for your survival. This is a redirection of energy. This is an activation of very, very powerful things that are meant to aid in your survival, but those are often misinterpreted. So that's problem number one for people, is that they don't understand what their body's going to do because they don't wake up every day in survival mode. We have the gift of luxuries. And these luxuries have removed a connection to the instincts or the association of our natural survival state, our physiology, psychology, all that stuff. So you're not going to be that great at it. You know, if the last time you drove a car was hundreds of years ago, and your entire life for the last 50 years, you've never really had to drive a car, then all of a sudden one day you find yourself in the seat of a car going 100 miles an hour down a windy mountain road, you're probably not going to make it to the bottom of that mountain. You're probably going to, careen off the side of that mountain because you simply don't understand how to control the vehicle. Well, we have lost touch with our survival instincts. So they don't just all of a sudden activate and we are the master of these instincts, not like our ancestors were, who every single day your survival depended on mastery of these instincts and learning how to live with these, how to control these instincts. So that's part one. The second part of it is that the world has changed. You now can and will be held accountable and judged for your actions. The context matters. So now you have all of this kind of intellectual stuff that's, this intellectual context, the legal boundaries, the need to, be able to articulate what you did and why you did it and how this whole, all of that there is nothing in your instincts that will help you discern any of that information at all. But you will be held accountable for whatever reaction your instincts may pull out of you, right? And now we're on this talk about how does stress and adrenaline distort instinct? What happens is when all of a sudden you find yourself in the context of a violent situation and your survival, your instincts, that born protector in you emerges. Well, it's not the context of a saber-toothed tiger trying to rip your throat out. And you're just doing anything and everything you possibly can, your instincts full wide open and being as savage and as ruthless as you possibly can because you're so outpowered by this massive apex predator that at the end of the day, if you end up killing this animal and you live, nobody's going to judge that. Well, those instincts can just open wide up. And like we already said, I would be hard pressed to believe that you could actually regulate those instincts. Most people can't. Okay, there's always a predisposition, but most people have never, again, they don't handle vasoconstriction or auditory exclusion or fast or slow time motion. They don't handle all of these things very well at all. They misinterpret those instincts. So again, if you can all of a sudden just have all of your physiological, natural, innate survival instincts open up and control those, well, that's a pretty much a minor miracle in and of itself. But now you take the context of like, well, this is another human being in a modern society where you're going to be judged. And so all of a sudden, this born protector activates inside you, and the hyperoxygenated blood floods your body, and all the stress chemicals are coming out. And all this because somebody called you a name, or somebody said a derogatory comment to your wife or to your child. And all of a sudden, all of this, born protector instincts completely overwhelms your judgment. It overwhelms your sense of right or wrong. It overwhelms any notion or any worry or concern of consequences after the fact. And now all of a sudden, over absolutely nothing, you're picking a rock up and smashing it into somebody's head. And then you're held accountable and you're convicted. And now you're spending time in jail, and it costs you your job, your family, everything. And the easiest thing for you to do is go, well, it's because this country's full of a bunch of weak ass people. You can't do anything in this country. You can't protect yourself. You know what I mean? And that becomes the thing. Well, no, you can't control yourself. That born protector inside of you, those instincts that you believe will be there and are going to serve you, have been dormant for how pretty much probably your entire life, and go back generations just prior to us. And what was passed down as well, we're being raised and lived in a quote unquote civilized society. So it has been generations of fathers and grandfathers and great grandfathers and great great grandfathers that have had these instincts suppressed, berated. You know what I mean? They're building a world where it's like, you don't need these anymore. We're not animals anymore. We've evolved beyond this. And these are all, that's all great stuff. I'm grateful for where we live, at the part of the world that I live in, that I don't have to wake up every day in survival mode. But I'm trying to build out this conversation around why context beats attributes, or why you can't, it's so dangerous to have this false narrative that men are just born with the protector instinct. It's like that's true, and yet at the same time, grossly overstated and misunderstood and misinterpreted. Okay, so the next thing I think I would contribute to this is, it's just a continuation, but we place a lot of value on teaching people to read the pre-incident indicators, because this is one of the biggest contributing factors to determining the context. Meaning, I say this all the time, there's aggression, and then there's violence. And there's an individual that is aggressive, okay, who potentially could be a threat. But in most cases, when they are defensively aggressive, this does not equate to violence. I mean, can you actually understand the difference of choice versus no choice? And what are the pre-incident indicators that determine that? How do you read and measure aggression in other human beings? And again, there's nothing about the human instincts that allow us to kind of just innately do this. Your body will respond to the stimulus of what is happening. So you will feel a wide array of different emotions. So you can absolutely intuit and feel like something is off here. I feel like there's danger here. Like those instincts are there. That intuition is there. But again, no one's been taught, if you haven't been taught a filter for how to interpret that. It's like, someone using sign language and they're signing at you, and you're like, listen, I get that you're saying something, but I don't understand sign language. So you may be able to piece together what they're trying to say to you, but it's never going to be as clear as if you actually understand sign language and you can actually then just read the cues. Well, that's very similar. The intuition can tell you something's not right about this person. I don't feel right. Something's off, and I don't know exactly what it is, but it's off. But if every one of our decisions and then our actions are based off something that we're like, yes, we have this instinct, and the instinct is probably right. It's grounded in something. But if you misinterpret the degree or the severity of that situation, and you have this kind of reaction off just a little bit of information, you can see where this could become extremely problematic. And so it is so important that you are taught the context and how to interpret the context. And that really becomes the foundation for modern day protection. And then the second part of that is to then learn to first understand, what does the human system do? How does the human system react? So what are my innate survival instincts? What is vasoconstriction feel like? What is auditory exclusion? What are we talking about here? What happens and how does it impact our memory and distorted memory and false memories? And what does it mean to be primed? How does the human system get primed? And then all of a sudden, the fact that I'm being primed and then causes me to take a certain action in a situation, which then is found to be negligent. And leads to my conviction. And it's like, well, how did that even happen? Because I believed in the moment I was 100% justified. But you're like, yes, but you didn't understand how these elements primed your system to falsely interpret this information. And you say, well, yeah, but that's not my fault. Well, yes, but it's because you were never trained. So you're going, whether you believe, whether your intention was to do this or not, you can be held liable despite your intention. Just having good intentions does not exonerate you or does not inoculate you against repercussions. And that might be legal, that might be moral, that might be, one of the quickest ways to get a good, strong, healthy dose of post-traumatic stress disorder is to not act in accordance with your own conscience, is to break one of your fundamental beliefs, values, rules about how the world is and how you operate in that world. So, obviously this conversation is meant to bring clarity and to help educate people to see things. But I also feel like in this conversation that we have to muddy it a little bit, because I want you to have a bit of a sensation of like our natural instincts and this natural born, when people, again, I will protect. I'm a man. It's either in you or it isn't in you. If you don't train that, if you don't learn to also add to it, there has to be that support system of being able to discern context. And context, understanding, and instinct are two separate things that need to be trained and merged into one thing, so that this becomes an integrated system for your protection. And that's what it is. That's why I use the term weaponizing. We weaponize men by saying, let's just deal with the easiest. Yes, physical. What are your survival instincts? What's the human system going to do? What are the strategies, tactics, and tools for how we can reform and refine that and sharpen that so that it becomes a very powerful tool that you can literally control psychology, physiology, physical action. You can control all this and use it in defense of yourself. But that has to be integrated, and it's almost like having a wire. And the wire is very powerful because the wire is what allows the current to transfer between 2 points. But that wire requires insulation. It requires a protective casing wrapped around it so that the electrical current can actually move in full force from point A to point B. It can actually create it can create a full circuit. Okay, so that's the context and the education. That's why I call this podcast The Education of a Weaponized Man. Is because that whatever physical skills, physiology, whatever instincts you're building and refining and sharpening has to be insulated around the development of judgment and understanding and clarity of pre-incident indicators, legal parameters, and all of these different things that allow us to read and develop and understand the context and get that part of it right. So this is hopefully it's a motivation. This is the biggest, most compelling reason why I believe every man needs to be trained, because there is no such thing as tough anymore. And that was one of the things, like, I love this saying, I've loved it for years, but I think it's more true now. It's always been true, but I think it's more true now than it's ever been maybe at other, I don't know. It's so powerful right now because when you say somebody is tough, yes, there's guys you see them, they just go, oh, that guy's tough. That guy's like, he just, that guy will go like, and when he starts fighting, like he's kind of wild. Like he just like, like they throw a punch, they do these things. There's this instinct, but he has no context. He has no judgment. He has no ability to regulate. And so this person is a danger to other people potentially, like in terms of like somebody might attack him. Yes, they might be a danger to that person, but they are even greater danger to themselves and their family because they will overreact. They will face severe repercussions. They will be taken. If you look at like a chessboard, they will be taken off the board. So there's no such thing as tough anymore. There's trained and there's untrained. And when you train, you can develop the same thing. You develop the strategies, tactics, tools. You learn to harness your instincts. You learn to harness and retap into that survival mechanism that exists in all of us. And it becomes a very, very powerful state. But that is wrapped in that understanding of context and judgment and restraint and all of these different things. And now you become an extremely hard piece to move off the board. You just become a completely different animal. And that's the goal of weaponizing. And that is, again, just to reference back, that is the weaponization, of that's the education of a weaponized man.
If you've listened this far, take a moment before moving on. Not to agree with anything that I've said, but to notice what stayed with you. These conversations aren't meant to provide answers that you can memorize. They're meant to sharpen your judgment, to clarify your responsibility, and to help you think clearly about moments that don't allow time for thinking. If this episode raised questions, that's the point. If it made you more cautious rather than confident, that's a good thing. And if it didn't resonate with you, you don't need to force it. Preparation is personal, and it has to align with who you are and what you're responsible for. You don't need to do anything after this. Just carry the questions with you and pay attention to how you see the world this week. We'll continue the conversation next time.